All right, let's go for it. Let's update to 121.3. Alright, fans, back and tell you once more, and in this tutorial we'll be updating our Fabric 121.1 project to 121.3. Huge disclaimer here in the beginning. I still recommend you stick with 1.21.1 as it is the de facto version that we're probably going to use until 122 comes out. The tutorials here will end with the 3 update videos because we're going to have this update video to 1.21.3, and then we'll have another one from 0.3 to 0.4, and then finally one from 0.4 to 0.5. And that will then conclude the entire tutorial series. I still basically recommend, highly recommend and suggest you stick with 121.1, or at least basically, make a different branch over here, or, save your entire project, things like that. Because there are a lot of changes coming in 0.3 and then in 0.4 and then in 0.5. So there's a lot of changes all around and it's just a lot. And yeah, to update, of course, what we're going to do is once again go to the Fabric MC develop website over here to go to 1.21.3. And we're going to copy over the versions right here. That's going to be 1.21.3, of course. Then here build 2, and then the loader version is 16.14. And we're going to also see that the Fabric version is 0.14. So let's take a look. Okay, that's a lot of versions actually in front right here. Okay, fair enough. And finally, there was also the Fabric Loom, which is 1.10 snapshot, and that we changed in the build.gradle file at the very top, 1.10. And I'm pretty sure we also have to change the Gradle for that. So under the Gradle folder, Gradle wrapper properties, yeah, we wanted to change this to 8.12 for the Gradle version. And those are actually all the changes that we need to do. So we can run the Gradle changes, or we can also open it up, reload all Gradle projects. And then here, we're just going to have to wait until everything downloads. And that's, once again, can take anywhere from a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes. Who knows? Sometimes it is mysterious on how long this takes, but let's just be patient. Let this run through, and then we can proceed from there. And there we go, build successful in 1 minute 6 seconds, and we're already greeted with a couple of errors right here, right in the middle of the tutorial mod class. To fix the fuel registry error, we're going to change this to the fuel registry events.build.register. Here we're going to start typing in builder, and you can see we can add this right here, and then in a inline function right here, we're going to say builder.add. And then here mod items.starlight ashes, and then 600, and that's going to be the equivalent of what we've done over here. And of course, if you want to add more things, we simply, add more builder calls, and that is it. The text.literal over here in the send message, I believe the only thing here is we actually need to add a overlay. We're going to say false over here. That just means that it is displayed in the proper chat and not in the middle of the screen. If you had a true over here, then it would be displayed in the middle of the screen. The rest in the tutorial mod class is done, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go through every single class from top to bottom, and we'll see if we run into any issues. So far, we're good. Here, we now have a new one. I think this is just the action result that is correct. So this changes the action result. If there are any imports that are wrong, Control, Alt, and O to delete all of the wrong imports. And, well, we're basically going to go through this. This has now also changed where you only can use the big success ones over here. There you go. So that's going to be fine. And then the magic block is going to be fine. The mod sapling is going to be fine. The pedestal block has the same thing here. This is now the action result instead of the item action result. And of course, Control, Alt, O to delete the wrong import. And then there you go. Those are all of the block classes done. We're crushing it out here. Well, we're going to see a couple of changes in just a second. Here in the recipe manager, what we actually have to do is we have to cast the world into a server world, and then we can use the get recipe manager. That one now is only available via the server world properly. So that has to happen in the Grove Chamber block entity. The pedestal block entity has no changes. This one has a change, but I'm pretty sure this is just the name of the it's not actually the name. I'm pretty sure it's only even the location of it. Could be. Yes, it's literally only the location of the class that it's changed. So just re-import it. Easy enough. Implemented inventory still works. And then here we get to the first one, which is the mod block entities. The registration out here, we can see we no longer have the block entity builder, For this, we now have the fabric block entity builder. So block entity type.builder, we're going to replace with the fabric block entity type builder class. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. And that has all of those done. And then we get to the beautiful mod blocks class, where you might say, well, wait a second, there are no changes out here. This is true, but or rather, there's no errors. Well, just because there's no errors does not mean that there aren't any changes, because there are actually some changes. And the changes specifically are the following method call that we need to call on the abstract block settings, and that is the registry key method. I'm going to show this once right here, and then I'm going to explain, and we're going to make this a little bit nicer. Basically, on every single block and every single item, we have to call this particular registry key method, and then we have to say registry key.of, and then registry keys.block, and then say identifier.of, and then tutorial mod.mod ID, and then whatever the name is that we have basically already given it, which is in this case the pedestal over here. Pedestal, there you go. And then that should be that, there you go. And yeah, that's a little bit stupid, because I don't know why this has to be the case. I don't know why, because it already knows that we're registering a block, it already knows my mod ID, and it already knows the name. So these are all things that I've literally already given it, but for some reason we still need to do it. A little bit annoying, but fair enough. And the way that we're going to do this is we are going to actually simply make these things in the methods that we have, right? So in the register block item method, in the register block method, and the register block without item method. I'm going to copy those over. I highly recommend what you do is you go to in the description below, there's the GitHub repository with all of the changes, of course. Additionally, you can also take a look at the fabric block over here. What you want to take a look at is the 1.21.2 changes, because 0.3 was just a hotfix with like a one minor change. So you can literally just take a look at this, and it will also basically give you all of the different changes that have happened. Very important indeed. And yeah, so the changes here are as follows. So the register block method now takes in a function of abstract block settings and block, and the register block without item method does the same thing. And then here in the register block item method, we're calling the registry key and then making the item right here just as before. In the register without block and the register block method, we do the same thing, where we basically apply this function over here and say, hey, registry key of this particular block with this particular name, and boom. So that's basically how we are registering this. That now means, though, that we have to change quite a few things, and those things are the following. We wanted to select new over here, and basically want to press Control R, and we want to replace this with the following: properties, and then the arrows, so minus and then bigger than, and then new, and there you go. That's what we want to replace, and we're going to replace this manually over here for each of them, because if we do all of them, then we're going to replace the same down here, and that's not what we want. So basically all of them for the normal ones. You can see now no errors are present anymore. However, we're not done quite just yet, because we also need to replace abstract block.settings.create, and we want to replace that with the properties right here. So that's what we want to replace next, and just go through once again for each of those until we end up right here. And those two we do not want to replace inside of the register block and the register block without item method. Those ones we do not want to replace. You can see in the growth chamber, if it only takes in a properties without any changes, what we can literally just do is replace this with a reference over here of : new, because we haven't changed the actual properties. So that is pretty neat. But that is, I think, the only one where we can actually do that totally fine. There's also a couple of other ones where we need to change this up a little bit, and that is going to be the driftwood sapling over here, because we are copying the oak sapling. However, the copy method is a static method, meaning that we can't use the properties. Right, the change for the driftwood sapling, what we're going to do is we're going to copy this over. Of course, we wanted to make this the mod sapling, and here it just needs blocks, not stone again. And the idea is that the properties that we have right here are the same properties that a normal sapling like the oak sapling has in the blocks class. So simply press shift twice, press blocks out here, and include non-project items, and we can take a look at the blocks. Right, it might have to load it over here for a second, but then oak sapling, and we can literally just copy this over, take a look at it, and we can see right here, map color green, no collision, ticks randomly, things like that. Those are all the things that we basically have right here. That's the idea, and then we're going to do the same thing for all of the ones that were copied. Basically, all of those, including the crops over here as well. Some of them are more complicated than others. Like I said, all of this is available to you down below. Blanks are super easy, where the leaves are a little bit more involved right here. This will then give us exactly the same exactly the same behavior, I think, of the Azalea trees actually, but it's fine. And then the same thing up here with the logs and all of that. So it is going to be a little bit longer here in this case, but that's going to be fine, right? That's the idea. And it will always have to use the properties from right here. Otherwise, it's not going to properly work. Finally, the honeyberry bush as well as the cauliflower crop. There we go. The same thing, basically just taking the ones from, I don't even know from which ones I've taken those, but I mean, these ones from the sweetberry bush, obviously, and then this one from one of the crops, basically. That's the idea. And yes, that is what we need to do, and that is what the mod blocks need. So if you have a lot of blocks, then yes, there's a lot of changes, but luckily you will only have to do this once. Like I said, if you're crazy enough to actually update. I still am of the opinion that you shouldn't, but some people want to update, some people want to use the new versions, so that's why we're doing this. That finishes the mod block class, so let's continue over here. Compat. I think we should probably also update REI, although it might, quote unquote, just work. It's not impossible that it sometimes just works. We're just going to keep it like this for the time being, and if there is an issue, then we're going to fix that at the end, not to worry. Components are fine. Data gen, I believe, mostly stayed the same. This should be a very easy one to fix. Yeah, it's now just registries, and then get or throw enchantment, there we go. And then here the same thing, registries, get or throw, there we go. That's going to be that. Model provider, we have, yes, of course, issues with the with this, which looks crazy. However, luckily, it's not going to be that bad because we can still use the register armor method with exactly this, the helmet. But then the second parameter has to be an identifier.of, and in this case, the tourmod.modID, and then this is pink_garnet. And then there has to be a third parameter, which is the equipment model. We're going to need to implement that anyway inside of the custom mod armor materials. So we're going to just do that already. This is going to be an equipment model. So equipment model over here, pink_garnet, equal to exactly this, right? So equipment model builder, add humanoid layers, pink_garnet.build. There we go. And this is going to be a public static equipment model. And we can then actually call this mod armor materials.pink_garnet. And the final one over here is the equipment slot, which obviously is going to be quite trivial in this case. So nothing too crazy, or very crazy if you're like, depending on your point of view, but it is what it is. This is what we're going to need to do. There we go. And there we go. We'll deal with the rest of the mod armor materials class in a second when we get to that. But the rest here should be fine. And we can close all out of this. The recipes, though, the recipes have changed. They have indeed. So the recipes are only slightly different, honestly. They're not too crazy. And the idea is as follows. So what we're going to do here is we're going to actually need to import a different method. So we're going to implement a new method. This is the getName method as well as the getRecipeGenerator method. In the getName method, it's just going to be tutorial mod recipes. That's going to be fine. And then the question is, what is it going to be in the generator over here? Here, we're going to return a new recipe generator, and we're going to do this inline. However, this actually needs, this needs the wrapper lookup as well as the recipe exporter, and then we can use this generate method exactly the same way. So this generate method, in everything that's inside of it, we're just going to cut this out, select it, press Ctrl X, and then paste it into this generate method. Once we have that, we're going to change this up just the tiniest bit. So the smelter over here no longer needs the exporter. This no longer needs the exporter. The shapeless recipe JSON builder is now create shaped over here. This is create shapeless, create shapeless, create shapeless. There we go. And then the same thing down here, create shapeless. And instead of an identifier here, we sadly actually need an entire registry key.of, and then registry keys.recipe, and then basically give it this, and that is replacing the identifier. There you go. And a similar thing we need down here. So instead of the identifier for the last parameter in the smithing template, we actually also need the entire registry key, but luckily it just gives you an identifier over here. That's fine. And we actually no longer need the item. Sorry, we do need the item, but not the exporter. There you go. That's the idea. Like I said, there are quite a few changes, so highly recommended you actually do take a look at the at the GitHub repository linked down below. Here, once again, it is now changed from get wrapper or throw to get or throw. Literally just replacing that. That's going to be fine. And there we go. And then we can move on to the effects. The mod effects here, this is just a change in the name. Now it's called movement speed instead of generic movement speed. The slimy effect has a change in the apply update method where it needs a server world over here. So server world, of course, passes into the super call, and there we go. And that is the effects done as well. Enchantments. So there is something about the enchantments somewhere around here that may or may not work. I've had, different issues with them sometimes, but we'll see when we get to that. And then we get to some of my favorite parts, which is, of course, the rendering and the entities. And of course here, a bunch of stuff has changed. And that bunch of stuff is, namely, first of all, the renderer. Here, we're going to have a secondary parameter inside of the generic, and that is going to be the entity render state. This is the entity render state. We will hover over this to implement the create render state method, where we'll simply do a new entity render state. And here, we're going to delete the get texture method because it wasn't needed anyway. That is the chair renderer. Awesome. And then the Mantis animations, nothing to worry about. Mantis model, however, oh my, here we freaking go. Okay, in the models, the single port entity model no longer exists. So we now have the entity model that we should use, but not of type T, but of a custom render type. We're going to type in Mantis render state, a render state, and we're going to hover over this to create this particular class. In the client package, that's going to be fine. This will extend from the living entity render state. And here, what this render state class needs is two things. Number one, the Mantis variant and also the idle animation state. And you'll see why in just a second. And then sort of what this class does and why it's here. Why it's here, I'm not quite sure, but what it does basically. The Mantis model now, in this one, we need to call the super and simply pass in the root right here. Easy enough. Secondly, get part as well as the render methods are gone. Easy enough as well. And then the next step in the set angles method, we no longer have all of these crazy parameters. We now only have the Mantis render state. I'm going to call this state. This is also means that the get parts over here, we no longer need to do. This time we need to call the super set angles passing in the state. To get the yaw and all of that craziness, we now in the set angles method state.yaw degrees, and then second parameter state.pitch. That's awesome. This is no longer animate movement. This is now the animate walking, passing in the animate walking. Then the limb swing is going to be the state.limb frequency, and the swing amount is going to be the state.limb amplitude multiplier. Update animation is now just animate, there you go. And we no longer can access the entity, but luckily the state has the animation state as well. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Same thing with the age and ticks. This is now just simply state.age. Easy enough. Now, all of these different things are now in the Mantis render state because obviously this extends from the living render state, which has a bunch of different things over here already existing. That's why we have access to all of this craziness. And then here, the broken imports, Control-Alt-O, and there we go. So that is sort of step number one for the model. The renderer now, also turns into something interesting. It is now a mob entity renderer of type Mantis state of type Mantis render state. And then in theory, we can actually remove the Mantis model generic because we can literally just remove it from here as well because it's no longer of type Mantis entity, is now just a Mantis model. So this fixes that, and then we can remove that here as well. And we no longer have we do have a get texture method. However, it is now of a Mantis render state. So we now have the state. Luckily though, what does the state have? Of course, it has the variant. So we are good. Similarly, inside of the render method, well, we no longer have the living entity and a F and a G. We now only have a Mantis render state called state. And luckily, the state here also has a field called baby. And that tells you whether or not it's a baby or not. So we can still have the scaling. Awesome. However, as you can see, there are two more methods that we need to implement. And those, well, one of them, and then a secondary one, which we need. The first one we need to implement is the create render state method, where we simply make a new Mantis render state. Super easy. However, at this point, you're like, render state, brother in Christ, what is going on? How does the render state even know what my idle animation, what my variant is? Well, that happens in the renderer, crazy enough, as well. Inside of the update render state method, where after the super call, we take the living entity render state and we say .idle animation state, .copy from, and then we take the living entity and then simply copy the idle animation state. And the same thing happens in the living entity render state .variant, and we simply say this is equal to living entity .get variant. Yeah, listen, I have no idea. I don't know. There must be some great reason why they did it like this, why they created this render state for all of their different entities and make this, I guess, easier a little bit because it's not as cluttered in terms of the methods. There's not like 100 parameters. Now they're all like consolidated in the render state class. But yeah, still very strange. We continue to go to the Tomahawk model, which obviously now also needs a render state. This is going to be the entity render state. Again, easy enough. In the constructor, call the super and simply pass in the root. Render and setup angles method no longer needed. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. And now, sadly, one of the things that's no longer going to work properly here, sadly, is, like I said, the Tomahawk projectile renderer. So it's no longer going to rotate. In the entity renderer, this is of projectile entity is correct, but it is also of entity render state. And this entity render state, we now also need, instead of the first 3 parameters here, this is the state. Then we no longer have the is grounded. So we're going to basically remove this. This has changed to get item glint consumer. In the super, we pass in the state, not the class, but the method. There we go. We need to implement the method right here, making a new entity render state. No, just a normal one. There we go. And then, of course, entity render state over here is the state right here. Easy enough. Oh, yes, actually correct. The texture doesn't even exist anymore. So what we can just do is literally just remove it because we don't need it anymore. And there you have it. That is the Tomahawk renderer in the custom one. So in the entities themselves, only slight changes. In the chair entity, we wanted to implement the damage method, which is just going to be false because we can't damage this. And in the remove passenger method, the kill here needs to be getting a server world. So we're just making sure server world is not client and then passing that in to the method. Nothing too crazy in this case. Mantis entity, the changes here are not as bad as one might think. The generic here is literally just gone, so we can just delete all of the generics, and that should be that. We also, however, need to add another thing, and that is going to be the entity attributes.tempt range. So the reason why we need to add the tempt range over here is because it has the tempt goal, and if it does not have this, then it's going to throw an error and actually crash the game. In this one, we need to add a reason. So this is going to be the spawn reason. So a spawn reason, in this case, breeding, of course, when we create a child. And down here, the mob tick method, I'm not actually 100% sure. I guess needs a server world. I mean, there you go. That's all there is. So server world, and then just passing in the world. And that fixes that issue as well. Easy enough. The Mantis variant, nothing to change. Tomahawk projectile entity, we no longer have access to the in-ground field. So that's going to be that. And the damage method, I believe, needs a server world in the first parameter. So that's going to be an interesting one. So I guess what we can do is literally just go into here. So put this into the server, into this, cast it to a server world, and there we go. Yep, that's fair, and that's going to be that. And then finally, mod entities. The build right here has an error, and that error can be fixed by making registry keys. I'm going to copy those over. You can see registry key of entity type, and then here we have a Mantis key, a Tomahawk key, and a chair key. This shouldn't be anything crazy in this case. I think that should be basically completely self-explanatory. We're just going to create those 3 keys and then pass them in to each of the different, well, registration builders over here. Awesome. All right, so we can continue with the custom item classes, where I'm pretty sure there's not too many changes. There is a bit of a change in the hammer item. I will see this in just a second as well when we get to the other tools. We basically need a float attack damage again, as well as a float, and that's going to be the attack speed over here, which we're going to add after the block tag. So attack damage, attack speed, and that should fix that issue. Mod armor item, of course. It has changed again, because why would you put this into a registry entry that I'm pretty sure we've done like from 120, sometime in 120 this changed. I don't even know. Of course, that is absolutely ridiculous. We wanted to basically replace this, so we're going to select registry entry of type armor item and simply replace it with armor item everywhere we can. And then, or armor material, of course, so that not armor item, armor material. We have to re-import that because it is actually at a different location. And here, this is no longer a type, but the equipment type, also very important. Finally, at the very bottom over here, we can no longer get the materials straight from the armor items. So what we need to do is we need to get the models. So we basically get the models and compare them to the model ID of the material. I am not 100% sure whether or not this works. You may or may not need to change this up a little bit or just take another look at this. It might not work entirely, but I think that it shouldn't be a big fix if it does not work. The issue here will be fixed when we get to the mod armor materials class. This is now also simply a action result. I am pretty sure no longer any type. So action result, then here same thing. Dot success is what we want to return. Control Alt O, there we go. And then we can actually move on to the mod armor materials class, where this is the moment where we're going to actually copy all of this stuff over so we can delete all of this and simply have that. That's going to be absolutely awesome. So one thing that we don't have here is the mod tags. So mod tags, we're going to implement this, and we're going to take the pink garnet repair over here, and we're going to actually create this in the item tags, just because it makes sense. Pink underscore garnet underscore repair. And we're actually immediately just going to go to data gen over here to just generate that as well. That is going to be under data gen. Where is my data gen? Here it is, item tags. And then this is going to be just this one right here, but with the pink garnet to repair. And we're going to say pink garnet. It should be kind of self-explanatory. What this does, it basically allows you to repair this particular type of armor. I think that should be kind of self-explanatory. Awesome. With that, the issue here fixes as well. Control Alt O to replace all of the wrong imports. And then we are off to the food components that have also changed a little bit, but luckily actually to pretty good actually. I'm going to copy this over, and you will see that the status effect is no longer applied via the food component builder, but is now compliant via a consumable components class. And this is actually really freaking cool because there are different types of consume effects. So you can see that there's a interface consume effects and teleport randomly, play sound. And this is really cool because that means that in theory, you can make your own custom consume effect. So basically, you can almost make anything that you want happen when a specific type of food is consumed. I think this is a really good change. There are some pretty cool changes all things around. Like that's not, there's nothing, not that like everything is bad over here. There are actually some pretty cool changes. It's just really annoying basically that they're all in minor versions, and the fact that there are so many if you've already worked through like the last 30 minutes, then you know what I mean. There's a lot of changes that is a bit rough. But yeah, item groups are totally fine. And then of course, mod items. Here we friggin' go. So first things first, of course, one of the issues is that we also don't have the registration. So we need to change the register item method here to, well, the following, basically to a function of item settings to item. All right, so then we're going to actually replace some stuff. So we're going to select the new right here at the top, and we're going to replace this with settings and then the arrow and then new. Very important that we have this entirely. And we're just going to go through and replace all of them. There are going to be a couple of errors because we're also making new item settings in almost every one of them, but we can, well, get around this. The last one, we're not going to replace. That's exactly right. And what we're going to do then is we're going to select the settings and then the arrow and then new item settings, and we're going to replace by basically all of this with literally just the settings. And we're just going to go through this once again, and that should actually fix a lot of the issues over here. There we go. And you can see there's a lot of issues fixed. In the very beginning over here, we even can replace that once again with item : new, because there are no specific item settings basically given. So that is why we can replace that. Pretty freaking neat. Most of this stuff is now totally fine. There are changes in the tools over here, as you can see, and the changes here are why would we add a attribute modifier like this? Obviously that is completely stupid. What we want to do is we just want to take the two numbers and basically paste them in after the settings over here, not those settings, these settings, so the tool materials, so kind of like this, and then we can delete the rest. I highly recommend you check out the GitHub repository link below for the code. That is going to make this a little bit easier to follow, because sometimes when it comes to the formatting and how many different parentheses do we need and things like that, it can sometimes get a little bit hard to follow everything exactly. But the idea is we want to take the two numbers, which are of course representing the attack damage and the attack speed, and just paste them into the new item constructors over here instead of the create attributes, because that has changed again. And maybe, just maybe, it will change again in the next two different versions, in the 0.4 and 0.5, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay, it is what it is. Okay, it is what it is. Anyway, that's gonna be those ones done, and the armor item type has now simply changed to equipment type, so we can literally just replace all 9 instances of that. Easy enough. There we go. That is going to fix all of the normal. And finally here we have actually this is actually correct. This is now an animal armor item dot type dot equestrian. That stays the same. However, the false over here simply goes, and that's going to be that. Finally, here we don't actually no longer need any of this. We're just going to make smithing template item : off, and that is going to do that. The alias block items are no longer needed because this has now changed. Per default, it is going to use the item name of the item, and we actually can see this inside of the blocks down here, where we are using the block prefix translation key when we register block items, and that's basically what I had here, so we're going to be totally fine. This is called the honey berries for some reason. That has changed its name. And finally, in the cauliflower, to add the effect in the food method, we simply can call mod food components dot cauliflower effect, and that is also then going to work. So basically, you add this as a second parameter in the food component over here, or the food call on the item settings. Awesome. All right, mod tool materials. Haha! This is, of course, a great change. We had this crazy stuff over here, all of these different things that we need. No, none of this. Get rid of all of it and just put it in here like this. Just do this. There you go. This is no longer an enum. It is now a class. And here we have our freaking pink garnet. Absolutely fantastic. Literally just one of the easiest changes ever. That is so much easier than just having to implement this whole thing every single time. I'm hoping this stays this way. Mixin, we do actually have 2 Mixin, that is correct. This no longer works, so we simply have to delete both of those Mixin because the bow stuff just does not work. I was unable to get that to work. I think I saw someone actually get it to work. I might be able to link that down below in the description if I find it again. But for the time being, we're just going to keep it like this. And with that, of course, we also want to go to our fabric mod JSON. No, sorry, our tutorial Mixin JSON. There we go. And delete both of those as well from there. Very important. And that is going to be okay. Then particles. Particles should have stayed the same. Potions are only needing a name right here. So the first parameter of a potion is now also a name. Slimy potion. Easy enough. And then in the recipe, yes, of course, the recipes have changed a little bit as well. First of all, the get ingredients are no longer overridden. And then in the get serializer, this now actually needs to extend from recipe of type growth chamber recipe input. So we just need to make sure that the question mark here extends from that. The disallow empty codec is now simply codec, and the get result and fits methods no longer exists. However, for that, we hover over this to implement the get ingredient placement method and get recipe book category method. Here in the recipe book category, we simply say recipe book categories dot crafting miscellaneous, so crafting MSIC, and then here in the ingredient placement we have ingredient placement dot for single slot, and then we just do the input item. I don't know if this is even going to work because we have no recipe book that displays in our custom GUI, so it doesn't make that much sense, but we should be fine. There should be nothing in the registration, nothing in the recipe input. Actually, there is something in the recipe input, and that is the get size method is now called size instead. Instead of get size, it is now size. All right, fair enough. The screen, yes sir. So inside of the screen, we no longer need the 3 render system calls because the first thing in the draw texture method is now going to be render layers, layer, get GUI textured. And very importantly, you now need to supply the size of your image. So by default, it was always 256 by 256. However, now we also need to supply this as well. In right here, we want to once again, of course, call the render layer, get GUI textured. That's going to be the change here. And the same thing happens in the pedestal right here. The 3 render system calls be gone. Here, we need to call the render layer. So render layer, get GUI textured, and 256 by 256 as it is the default size. The screen handlers should have no issues, so those should both be fine. Absolutely awesome. Registration also fine. Sounds are fine. The trim might have something. Yes, that is just a change in where it is located, so we can simply do this, re-import it. Easy enough. Same thing with the trim right here. Easy enough. Simply re-import it. Done and done. Util hammer usage event is fine, loot is fine, mod is fine, tags are fine, villagers are fine, the world gen, oh no, world gen is all fine. Should be all working exactly as intended. So finally, client, data gen, tutorial mod, all is here. And you might say, let's go, we are done. Aha! No, we are not done just yet. There's tiny changes over here inside of the assets folder. So the assets folder has changed in the following way. Under tutorial mod models, we now have a new folder called equipment. Under there, I'm going to copy over the pink_garnet.json. And you can see that we basically have, I mean, I have a wolf body in here. I don't think we need that, but that's okay. The idea here is just that this is now pointing to the equipment textures of the different equipment, meaning the things that we had in textures, models, armor before now goes to textures, entity, and then under entity, we have the equipment folder. And inside of there, the names of the folders are exactly these names. So there's going to be humanoid. So under entity, equipment, humanoid, and under entity, equipment, humanoid _ leggings, and under entity, humanoid, and under entity, equipment, horse body. This is where all this goes. The pink garnet layer goes to the humanoid folder, where it is going to be renamed to pink_garnet. This is not strictly necessary because the name of this PNG, of course, is defined right here. So in theory, you could rename this here as well, but this is the way that vanilla does it. So that's the way that we're going to do it as well. I'm going to also add this one. So the layer 2 goes into the leggings. And of course, as per the JSON file, it's going to be renamed to pink_garnet. And the same thing happens to the horse. So in the horse armor right here, we move this to the horse_body, where this is going to be renamed to exactly pink_garnet.png. This means we no longer need the horse armor. We no longer need models armor. And that is that. This does not conclude everything though, because under trims, models has now also changed its name to entity, and then armor has changed its name to humanoid, and then inside the entity directory, we also want the humanoid_leggings. That is where the Kaupen_leggings go. I highly recommend you double check the exact folder structure, both in the GitHub repository, and you can also, in theory, check it under the external libraries in the inside of here, assets, Minecraft, and then, textures. You can see trims, entity, humanoid. You can basically check it all there as well. Highly recommended to do so. That is going to be, because it's sometimes a little bit harder to follow the exact folder structure if you just have it written like this. Sometimes you want to read it out a different way. But yeah, there you go. Those are those changes. And finally, the armor trims JSON file. Right now, it looks like this. It looks for models armor. However, it has to look for entity, humanoid, and there you go. Entity, humanoid leggings. Exactly how we have it. Here I even call it Kaupen leggings. We're just going to call it Kaupen because that's basically how this is set up. But there you go. That is the change. And I'm pretty sure now we are actually done with everything. I'm pretty sure. Not quite. Wait a second. There's one more thing that we need to do. And that is, first of all, let's just, for the sake of argument, run the data gen. So let's run data gen. And while that runs, we can go to our data recipes, because these are the recipes for our growth chamber over here. And there's even actually one thing, absolutely no worries. So this is the get result no longer exists. This is correct. We have a This is true. So how do we get a result from a recipe? Honestly, good question. What? Wait a second. Let's take a look at how I fixed that. I did not. Apparently. No, I did. Oh, it is called output, I'm pretty sure. Output, there we go. So we have output and then just nothing. That should be fine. And I think that should be then it. Data generation. Let's take a look. Okay, I think now it's going to run through and we have the growth chamber recipes open. And here what we need to change is the ingredients are now no longer objects. They are now literally just the name right here. So we basically just change it to that. Awesome. And there we go. And then the same thing goes here. And then finally the same thing goes here. There we go. Okay, that's going to be fine. There was an error over here, and that is going to be that an explosion. Yeah, so this is, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so this is She Daniel. Obviously, the issue here is that we have not updated REI, right? Because I literally just took the same version. So yeah, let's take a look at the new REI version. The one I've used is 17.0803. There's probably one that is more up to date, but that's going to be okay. And then architecture is 14.04, and that is 16.143. That is going to be okay. So let's reload Gradle changes one more time. So like I said in the very beginning, that is, we did need to update REI as well. So let's just let this run through. And once that is done, I think we do need a couple of changes in the compat at that point, but it should work. We should be able to get this to work. I think so. All right, 41 seconds. There we freaking go. And let's just close everything and take a look at the compat over here. That is all fine. The display here has one change, I think, but it shouldn't be anything too crazy. It's just one method that we also need, the get serializer method, which is going to, yes, I think I remember that I was unable to get it to work because of this issue. So the recipe filler right here changed and I was unable to get that to work. I think that was an issue that we had in the last time we updated to 121.3 as well. I still have not found any fixes for that, so we're just going to keep it like this. I think that means that REI does not 100% work for our custom recipe. It is a shame, but there we go. And yeah, let's just let the data gen run through for the time being, and then we'll see. There we go, 55 new JSON files written. Sometimes I don't even know what the frick the JSON files are, but with that, we should have everything. So let's jump into the game and see if it works. Oh, I actually missed one of the Mixin. That's actually kind of funny. There we go. All right. And then here, this is actually another one that is correct. There we go. And now we should be good to go. 121.3, and let's just jump into a new world for the sake of argument, and let's see if everything still works. All right, so we find ourselves in Minecraft, and let's just take a look. That looks pretty freaking good so far. Let's see just a couple of things over here. Obviously, that does not entirely work. Let's see the mantis, if it still spawns. That still does it. That still works. The tomahawk obviously has no more, well, change. The FOV here doesn't change anymore, but the texture does. That's pretty good. If we eat the cauliflower, we might just get a, there we go. We get the health boost. And then if I dig down right here, should be able to, there we go. We can still, change those things. And when it comes to this, let's take a look right here. Just for the sake of argument, we got the growth chamber. And I'm pretty sure because we did the changes, this should all work as well. And it does absolutely amazing. We can still do that. Although do still remember that there is still a desync, sadly, in here. But there we go. That's going to be fine. And then I think this is also all fine. Well, there you go. That should be everything that we have right here. And that's going to be, update to 121.3. Absolutely awesome. Well, if you're crazy enough to actually make it through the entire video, congratulations. Listen, I will still say I highly recommend sticking with 121.1 because while some changes are pretty nice, we definitely had to leave a couple of things behind that just don't work yet. And basically that are going to change. A lot of the stuff is going to change again in 0.4 and then again in 0.5. And highly likely that a lot of these changes will happen once again in 0.6. If that's the next version, or if 122 comes out next time, that would be better. But at this point, I highly doubt it. But we will have to wait and see. For the time being, though, that is the update to 0.3. Next time, we're going to do 0.4 and then another time 0.5. 5 updates. But that's going to be it for this tutorial right here. I hope you found this useful and you learned something new. And in this video right here, we'll talk about the update to 121.4. Until then, hope to see you there. So, yeah.